like we said, for those who were here 2 weeks ago, right, we talked about how, that time we talked particularly about how motivation is the determining factor for the nature of a karmic action. Right? Buddhism, but that's the teaching of, that's what the Buddha taught, right? So in other words, it's not how an action appears, it's your motivation behind the action that determines whether it's a positive or negative action, right? And that's clear. You know, so for example, actually, because today we'll get into, you know, particular actions, but that's an important point in Buddha, you know, in the Buddha's teaching, is that the main point is your motivation. You know, so for example, you know, if you give a gift with the motivation of, actually sometimes people give gifts to put somebody down, right, to make somebody feel bad. You want to give something so that you gave something better than the other person, so they'll feel bad, right? That's not a positive action. You know, so even though it's a giving a gift, it could seem positive, but if the motivation is to make somebody else feel bad, then that's not positive. You know, in the same way, stealing, right? In general, stealing is a negative action. But if you're stealing your drunk friend's car keys to save their life, maybe it's a positive action. So it's, you know, if you're doing it out of compassion, trying to save their life and other people's lives, then that would be a positive, right? So I'm just giving examples there where, so the point is that the motivation is what determines the nature of an action, right? So we went over that last time. I don't want to dwell on it, but I wanted to mention that. So that's why we always kind of at the beginning reassert our motivation. Because Lama Zopa Rinpoche often points out, he says, otherwise people can do a lot of things that look like Dharma practice and they're not practicing Dharma. Right? Like, sometimes Lama Zopa said, you know, a person could be, you know, you could be in a retreat and not be practicing Dharma. You could be a monk and not be practicing Dharma. He said you could be an abbot and not be practicing Dharma. You know, in other words, because in other words, the position is not what determines it. Your clothes are not what determine it. What determines if you're practicing Dharma is your motivation. Right? So if you do anything motivated by compassion, that's practicing Dharma. So that's an example. Right? If you do anything motivated, as Nagarjuna said, we said last time, if you do any action motivated by greed, hatred, or ignorance, then that's not practicing. So it's the motivation that determines an action. That's a fundamental thing. But actually, before we get into more like kind of thinking, you know, more like analytical stuff about karma, I want to actually do another, like introduce, and then we'll do one more meditation. Because I think if we start getting into the analytical, then we'll never get back to meditating. So what I wanted to do today was also now do a meditation on rejoicing. And I want to say something about rejoicing first, which is actually Lama Tsongkhapa, who was a great Tibetan master, said that rejoicing is the easiest way to create good karma. And he said, actually, if you're lazy, a couple of different Tibetan masters said this, if you're lazy, then it's a very good way to create good karma. So that's why I like talking about it, because I'm very lazy. But actually, rejoicing is a very profound practice. But I want to introduce it, I want to make a couple comments first. Like, so, what I've noticed over the years is that sometimes, usually with rejoicing, you start by rejoicing in your own good deed. And actually, so in Buddhism, this is an important point. What the Buddha and Buddhist teachers say is that because the mind is the fundamental main factor in determining karma, rejoicing in your own and others' good actions in and of itself creates good karma. It's also a pleasant thing to do. But what I've noticed among Western people, Americans in particular, that's what I'm most familiar with in this way, is that many American people I talk to actually find it experientially difficult to rejoice in their own good actions. Especially like, actually it's strange, like some people actually like, I think it's a cultural thing, that some people superficially appear to have an easy time rejoicing in their own good actions, like if they're very narcissistic and grandiose, right? They'll go around saying, I did this, and oh, you wouldn't believe how great I was, but usually they're rejoicing in negative actions actually is the problem. So that's not virtuous. So in Buddhism what they say is, if you rejoice, actually it's a very important point, you have to rejoice, if you're going to practice rejoicing as a meditation, you have to rejoice in something positive. Does that make sense? And actually, the Buddha taught that if you rejoice in negative deeds, you create negative karma. So for example, this is easy to do if you watch, actually, so this is, I'll give a little talk about this because it's important. Actually, like in terms of karma, it's really easy to create a lot of bad karma through rejoicing or a lot of good karma through rejoicing. I'll give an example. If you watch TV, right? Actually, let's say you're watching TV and you see, and first of all, like, actually, many people do this, right? People watch somebody else, like if you think this is my enemy, I don't like people in this certain country, right? And then people see that country being bombed and they rejoice. Actually, that happens all the time, right? Like, so that's, they say that that's almost the same, actually it's similar karma to actually bombing the people. And there's a karmic level, there is because you're actually being happy that people are dying, right? Being killed. Also right now in the political season, right, you have to be a little careful, like, if you rejoice that somebody makes a mistake or does something stupid or does something bad, right? Somebody does a bad action and you don't like them, right? Like, say, and then you think, oh, that's great, they made a fool of themselves, or they, like, it's not so ideal actually, is it? So, so any action, so in other words, so one thing, they call that, Lama Zopa calls that wrong rejoicing. In other words, rejoicing in somebody's action, also like if you don't like somebody and then somebody else hurts them, and you think, oh, that's great, I didn't have to do it, but somebody else did, that's wonderful. It's not, that's a wrong rejoicing. So, right rejoicing, healthy rejoicing, let's call it, is where you're rejoicing in somebody else's positive action. So, actually, that now gets to what I was starting to say. So, sometimes for some reason, I've noticed that, especially like people, for some reason, sometimes people have a hard time rejoicing in their own good actions, like just feeling, oh, it's so wonderful I did that, right? Like I'm so happy I got to study. I'm so happy I got to help somebody. I'm so happy I got to learn something. I'm so happy I got to, whatever, do some other, do something else positive, and really feel a sense of how wonderful that is, how great that is, how like I'm incredibly happy about that, and actually cultivating that. Sometimes people almost seem to feel guilty. They think that's like grandiose or something, but actually it's not grandiose. And I want to say something about that from a Buddhist perspective. Is if you can't rejoice in your own good actions, then you're not likely to keep doing them. In other words, this is part of the teaching on the nature of rejoicing, is if you rejoice in something, whether it's what you're doing or what somebody else is doing, first of all, it engages your mind in that thing, right? And it makes your mind be inspired about that thing. And it makes your mind want to do more of that action, right? In other words, so if you do good things and you never think about them, actually you're less likely to keep doing them. Does that make sense? So by rejoicing in your own positive actions, it creates, first of all, it increases the positive energy, the merit, the good karma of doing that. It also makes it more likely you'll continue doing that, and it connects you more to that kind of action. So they say that it's good to rejoice, start by rejoicing in your own good actions, actually. Right? And then to rejoice, there are different categories, actually. You can rejoice in your own good actions, then you can rejoice in the good actions of other ordinary people. Then you can rejoice in the actions of Aryas. That means like people who have seen emptiness directly. Great saints, right? And then you can rejoice in the deeds of bodhisattvas. And then you can rejoice in the deeds of Buddhas. Right? So there are many different categories. These are just different categorizations, right? But within each of those, there are tons and tons and tons of examples, then, right? Actually, if you really start to think about rejoicing, you could do it all day and all night. Because there are so many. And I want to say one more thing about that, because I think, again, I'm just getting a little bit like a cultural commentary just briefly. I'm not trying to do too much of that. But think about it, right? How much of our attention is on the worst things people do, right? And if you watch television or read the newspaper or nowadays nobody reads the newspaper, I guess. If you read whatever, CNN.com or something, or NewYorkTimes.com, whatever, most of the news is about the worst things that people do, and yet that's a very small percentage of people, right? And much less reporting is done on the best things people do, right? But from a Buddhist perspective, and actually if you just think about it, this is Buddhist teaching, but actually just in perspective of having a peaceful, happy mind, just be simple about it, right? Like, it makes much more sense to spend your time thinking about the best things people do, right? And rejoicing in those. First of all, and think about the benefits of rejoicing. First of all, for sure it makes you happy, right? Whereas if you actually spend time thinking about, like if you just sit down and think about all the just the positive actions, for example, the Dalai Lama does. He's just one person, right? But actually it would take hours just to think about those, because he does so many good things, right? He's traveling around and working with, whether he's teaching, helping other Tibetans, right? In terms of helping Tibetans in Tibet by advocating for them, helping the refugees. He spent his whole life helping his own, people who are refugees. Where just that, if you looked at it, you would think that's a whole life's work, right? Like just what he's done for Tibetan refugees, helped preserve their culture. He's helped preserve, help save their lives, help create hospitals and hospices and schools and cultural centers and all. If you just looked at that, you would think that's a whole life's work, but that's like maybe about 5% of his life's work, right? So I'm just saying you could go on and on rejoicing just about that, right? Or, think of someone like, it doesn't have to be somebody Buddhist, you can think of someone like Mother Teresa, right? You could spend all day just thinking about the actions that she did, right? Just each individual person she helped, right? Because it was done with love. And the point why it's worth rejoicing in is it was done with love, right? That's the point. Whether it was the Dalai Lama helping people or Mother Teresa helping people, the point is that you're rejoicing because these people did, you're rejoicing in the action done out of love. Does that make sense? So that it becomes a positive thing. And so actually, what did Lama Tsongkhapa say about it? I think the actual teaching he said is, he actually said that if you rejoice in the actions of someone, how do I say this, like, who's a more advanced spiritual practitioner than yourself, like these examples, let's say the Dalai Lama or Mother Teresa, that while you're rejoicing that, you're creating, I think he said, like, what is it, half the merit? Half the same, in other words, it's like you're creating, I think it's half maybe actually literally true, but I think it also gives a feeling, whereas you're not quite doing the same as what, your good karma is not quite equal to Dalai Lama's in that, but you're creating a percentage of that, right? But they say actually if you're more advanced practitioner than the person you're rejoicing in, you can actually create more merit than they are by rejoicing. In other words, if your heart's filled with more love than somebody else's, then you're rejoicing in what they're doing, you may be creating more positive karma than they did. This is not a competition, I'm not saying it for that reason. But I think the idea there is, it's supposed to, the idea really is this, is it's trying to express something I think about your state of your heart. That's why I'm talking about that. It's how filled your heart is with love and with joy and with caring and with that. That's really I think what it's getting at there, is how much your heart is sincerely able to be filled with love and also with joy at the happiness of others and joy at the good causes. And you can also rejoice, I'll say this too, you can also rejoice in two different things. One is people doing good actions. The other is you can rejoice in the results of good actions. In other words, in other people's happiness and well-being. So if you can think of people who are very healthy, people who are very strong, people who are who have enough resources, people who have good friends, and to rejoice in that as well. That's also an antidote to jealousy, right? Jealousy is easy to give rise to, right? It just causes misery. There's not one single beneficial thing about jealousy, right? All it does is torture yourself, right? And if you're not around the person you're jealous of, at least you're not bothering them, but you're torturing yourself. If you're around them, then you're also bothering them, just your facial expression, right? You see what they have and you're scowling or something, it makes them enjoy, because especially like, think about it, the people you're jealous of, this is what Buddha said, they're actually dying, everybody's dying, right? Everybody's impermanent, everybody suffers so much. So if somebody finally finds a few moments of peace and happiness, rejoice, don't be jealous. It's like, everything's so temporary that it's so silly to be jealous, right? You see somebody with a lot of resources and you're jealous of, their resource. First of all, you don't know how much happiness or misery they have in their life. And secondly, you don't know how long it's gonna last. So jealousy is like, it's like a little kid, when little kids start crying because the other kid has this thing in the sandbox. It's a bit like that, actually. The Buddha said being jealous of anybody is a bit like that, isn't it? So instead, we should rejoice in both in the causes, so the good actions people do, and also in the good results. And that's quite logical, right? Isn't that a much more reasonable way to use our mind? Whereas if you have a human mind, actually rejoicing is a very logical practice, isn't it? So the idea in Buddhism is this, is if you rejoice, it makes you happy in the moment, right? First of all. And then also, it inspires you, right? Whereas especially if you're rejoicing in the good actions of others, it inspires you to want to do more, be more like that. It also just fills your mind with images and thoughts like that, right? And then also it's said to be an easy way to create a lot of merit. So there was one, actually Kensho Rinpoche quoted, I forget his name, I think, there was one Lama who said something, because like a lot of times to create good karma, right, in Tibet, people would like prostrate all the way across the Himalayas and, do circumambulations of Mount Kailash, which is incredibly, a lot of hardships, or, walk over the Himalayas to India to go on pilgrimage, right? And so this Lama said, he said, rejoicing is wonderful because he said, how else can you create, huge mountains of good karma while just laying down on the couch? Because rejoicing is done with the mind, right? It's not done with your body. I mean, you can go like this if you want to as you're rejoicing, but you don't have to, right? It's just in your mind. So you can you can be laying there on the couch. And actually, that's why also, remember for those of you who know, like, right, the teaching, the famous Buddhist teacher Shantideva, right? The great Buddhist saint Shantideva from Nalanda Monastery, right? There's that famous story when he was all the other monks were working really hard, right? They were studying, and they were debating, and they were, working for the monastery and so on. And Shantideva was always hanging out in his room, and he seemed to be sleeping all day. So the monks called him 3 actions, right? Meaning he eats, sleeps, and poops. They were always making fun of Shantideva. And then finally, there's that famous story, right, where they said to Shantideva, they were trying to get him kicked out of the monastery. So they said, why don't you come give the teaching this month, or something. They built a big throne, and they thought they would just humiliate him because they thought he didn't know anything. But actually, Shantideva was just chilling out in his room. He was practicing things like rejoicing. He was doing other mental trainings, right? He was practicing in his mind, right? Actually, I should point here. He was practicing in his mind. And this was one of his many practices, right? And when he gave that teaching, then they realized he was I won't go to the whole story, but basically they realized he was probably the greatest, I think he was actually the greatest master in Nalanda, but they didn't know it. Because these things aren't necessarily shown by the outer aspect, right? It's by, Buddhism is a mental practice, right? So you can't tell, because he was debating less than somebody else, or not staying up reading as much, you couldn't tell what was in his heart. But then when he taught, he actually spontaneously spoke a poem, right, called The Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. Right? An entire book of poetry he spontaneously recited from his heart, and then they realized he was the best master of all, not the worst. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful book too. Sometime we've studied it at the center before. Maybe we'll do it again someday. But so let's do this. So let's go ahead and before we get into the didactic and things about karma, let's meditate a little bit on rejoicing. And maybe I'll at least I'll give like some ideas as we go along. But I want to say this. I'll give some ideas for rejoicing just in case some people aren't familiar with the practice. But feel free to ignore me if you want to. In other words, if you know about rejoicing and you like it, then ignore me and rejoice in what you want to rejoice in. But I'll just guide it because I know some people probably are newer to the practice. So I'll say some stuff. So feel free to ignore me. So actually, we can start with ourselves, right? That's what the guideline is. And so, first of all, right, each of us, we can rejoice, for example, that just by coming here today, each of us, right, has some sense of aspiration for something, for some, first of all, compassion and love, and some understanding, right, to benefit ourselves and others. How wonderful. How precious that is. It's very precious. Already, in just a little bit of time we've been here, we've tried to cultivate some understanding, some love, some compassion. How wonderful. We can think back, right? Again, just in a very straightforward way. Obviously, right? Each of us here, many times in our lives, has done our best, right, to cultivate a sense of love towards others. Has done our best to cultivate some compassion, some empathy, some kindness to others. How wonderful. There's nothing better for a human being to do with their life than that. And so in many different moments in our lives we've done that, which is taking the very essence, the very perfect, pristine essence of life in those moments when we were loving, whether it was to ourselves, to a friend, to our parents, or our children, our grandparents, or our grandchildren, nieces or nephews, aunts or uncles, even towards the strangers, towards people at work. So how wonderful. Many times we've been patient when we could have gotten angry. That's actually, in some ways, the supreme practice. Wonderful. That was our contribution actually to world peace. When somebody tried to provoke us, we stayed patient. How wonderful. We can lift up our hearts and rejoice in that every time we've ever been kind to somebody, every time we've been gentle, empathic, patient, every time we've tried to learn something, we've read spiritual books and tried to understand the meaning of life, we've contemplated sincerely what's the purpose of life and tried to live in a better way, try to change some unhealthy pattern and have a better pattern. So we can feel how wonderful. Like that's excellent, beautiful, wonderful. And every moment we've spent trying to understand, trying to read, trying to contemplate, attending classes or teachings, trying to understand spiritual teachings, how wonderful it is. How beautiful, how precious, how marvelous. We take joy in feeling like how wonderful it is. May I be able to do that again and again. May I be able to more and more wholly devote myself, engage myself in those kinds of loving, patient, gentle actions, those actions of seeking wisdom. How marvelous. Then we can also rejoice in the similar actions that we've been rejoicing on our own, but then we can expand it to everybody else in this room. We can imagine how many wonderful things over the course of a lifetime, how many kind things, how many patient things the other people in this room did. How wonderful. How beautiful. How important that is. It's more important than the biggest news story. That somebody else, that the other people in this room did something loving, did something kind. We can rejoice also in the deeds of others, right? So we'll do the category of ordinary people. So you can think about, there are infinite examples. But for example, you can take the example just of teachers who teach anything, actually, with a sense of love and concern for their students. Doing their best to share some wisdom with their students. Whether students are little children or adults, if a teacher is teaching with a loving concern, how wonderful that is. It's actually one of the most important things that happens, right, between human beings. And actually that's true whether it's like professional teachers, right, or parents or grandparents teaching things, or mentors, friends teaching. The sharing of wisdom, of hard-earned knowledge and hard-earned wisdom, how unbelievably precious that is. If that's not something to rejoice in, what is? You can be creative in rejoicing. It's easy to think of the actions of, again, done with love, right? The actions of nurses, of doctors. Of ambulance workers, who are there when somebody's most in need. They do what they do out of some sense of caring. Firemen. When people are desperately in need, that somebody comes and helps, how wonderful. Somebody dedicates their life to doing a large portion of their life to such things. examples of just ordinary, the positive actions of ordinary people. Whether it's what they do at work, whether it's parents, grandparents, people caring for elderly, sick relatives. There's so many beautiful actions to rejoice in. So like within this category, right, those are some kinds of examples, but there are also countless other examples. You know, and also we can remember also people, ordinary people doing spiritual practice. Ordinary people practicing generosity, giving things to others with a sincere heart. It brings others joy. Ordinary people cultivating beauty in the world, creating beautiful art, beautiful spaces for other people. You know, inviting people, caring for their neighbors, just being kind to somebody. You know, and then on up, right? People doing spiritual retreats. Every person, how many people are on this planet who are doing or have done retreats? People who are doing meditations on love, right? You could think of, you know, certainly there are many, many, you know, Buddhist masters just cultivating incredible universal compassion, but also Christian, you know, many, all different traditions, actually every religious tradition has great, you know, people like Thomas Merton, so many people who cultivate so much love. So much compassion. And people who like set aside time in their lives, monastics or other people who set aside time to deeply contemplate the nature of reality, to deeply contemplate how things work, to read, study, contemplate, and meditate. And artists who make statues, paintings, inspire people, even including, you know, statues of enlightened beings, paintings. And then for those who are familiar, like with, and then another category I said is like Aryas, right? Rejoicing in the deeds of Aryas. So for those who have any familiarity, some may and some may not, but like the deeds of someone like Nagarjuna, who fathomed like the deepest teachings of the Buddha, teachings on the inseparability of dependent origination and emptiness, and then explain those teachings for others in a completely clear, faultless way. And then beings like Chandrakirti, who explained those things so clearly, so perfectly, and also explained how to cultivate compassion, how to go about practicing compassion perfectly, so flawlessly explained it to others and preserved that lineage so that people in the future could practice those things. How wonderful, how beautiful. These are all causes for rejoicing. And then we said, like, I'll give one more example. The deeds of the Dalai Lama. We said we could go on for hours, but actually, just briefly, right? How he works with scientists, right? How he works just with everyone, right? Not only has he helped preserve Tibetan culture, but like when he meets with neuroscientists, then he inspires them to study the nature of the neurology of compassion and joy. When he meets with psychologists, then he inspires them to study the psychology of compassion, love, peace, and joy. When he meets with physicists, he helps them to explore more deeply interdependence and the ultimate nature of reality. When he meets with politicians, which he does many, many times, then he inspires them, right, and sets an example and raises the issue of nonviolence, of peace, of mutual understanding. When he meets with religious leaders, right, whether Muslim, Hindu, Jain, Christian, Jewish, all from every tradition, right, that he talks about, he inspires and is part of an effort to have mutual understanding, mutual respect, a common common ground, and common understanding of the value of love, of tolerance, of cooperation. He spends so much effort doing that, trying to cultivate, and actually meeting with leaders, and actually successfully cultivating a sense of mutual respect. And then, like, as if that would seem like it would be possible to do more than that. And yet actually, probably the main action of the Dalai Lama has been teaching. He teaches tens of thousands, oftentimes hundreds of thousands of people. Teachings on compassion, on love, on wisdom, in a flawless way. Incredibly deep, marvelous teachings, setting an example and then also explaining how to practice. Right, to countless people all over the planet, all over the globe. And not only that, but also for yogis who are in retreat, giving them guidance that nobody else can give, actually. People who are very advanced practitioners, who have nobody else who can explain the most advanced practices, and they come to the Dalai Lama, and he can somehow still explain to them also exactly what next to practice. And not only that, but also he takes the responsibility to oversee the educational institutions that produce all the other teachers of Buddhism. So all the great monastic universities, he helped to get them places to exist. He appointed, the abbots during this time of exile, appointed the senior teachers, helped oversee their curricula, modified the curriculum, so that all the other teachers actually arise in dependence on the Dalai Lama's curriculum. So I'm just giving examples. You go on and on, right? There's so much to rejoice in. So let's give a couple minutes. Just you can think now about whatever you want, but take a couple more minutes, whether it's ordinary people, extraordinary people, just to rejoice in the positive action. questions or comments about rejoicing before we go on to the next subject? It's quite a nice practice, isn't it? Can't go wrong with rejoicing. So, what I'm going to talk about next, last time we talked about the 4 general guidelines of karma, and so today, what we're going to talk about is, we'll see how far we get, and the next time we'll continue on with this, but is a few different subjects, more details about karma, I guess, let's put it that way. And in particular, I want to talk about different kinds of results. So karma means action, right? But also, it really is talking about cause and effect, right? Causal relationships or interdependent relationships. I think causal relationships is a better way to put it. So actually, I'll start with this, though. So ordinarily, when talking about karma, the Buddha himself, when he talked about karma, actually, first of all, there are many examples in the Buddhist teachings where the Buddha, actually, sometimes the Buddha gave a general teaching on 10 non-virtuous actions, right, which we'll go over in a minute. But many of the teachings of the Buddha on karma, if you actually read the sutras, it was that somebody was walking, or the monks were walking, or somebody was walking around with the Buddha, or the Buddha arrived somewhere, and they saw some strange event happen, right? Something would happen. Somebody would go through some kind of horrible experience or wonderful experience, or it would have to only be a person, some animal, something would happen. And then somebody would say to the Buddha, what was the karma for that? And the Buddha would answer. He would say, well, in the past, such and such happened, and that was the karmic cause that led to this result. And if you read the Buddhist sutras, which means the actual teachings of the Buddha didn't write them down, he spoke them, right? And then Shariputra, for the most part, was always around the Buddha. He was the Buddha's assistant, right? So usually it's Shariputra, all the sutras start with, thus I have heard, right? So that's Shariputra saying, I was with the Buddha and I heard it, basically, right? And then it describes what. And in the teachings on karma, that's important in a way because, actually I'll say this too, so in Buddhism, they say that, in Buddhist philosophy, they say there are 3 kinds of phenomena. One is, what's the word, there are different translations, I'm just going to call it obvious phenomena. Easily perceived phenomena. For example, that this is wood, right? Or that there's carpet on the floor. Those are direct objects of direct perception. Then there are what they call slightly hidden phenomena. These are phenomena that are not objects of direct perception, but that through contemplation you can realize, right? I'll give an example of that. That things are subtly impermanent and change from instant to instant. We don't usually notice that. In other words, that's not something that ordinary people ordinarily think about or notice, but if you contemplate, right, it's clearly true, right? In other words, our bodies, right, in any instant, there's actually an inconceivable amount of change, right? Blood's flowing, neurotransmitters are being released, electrical impulses are firing in our nerve cells, mitochondria are interacting on and so on in the cells, right? Proteins are being produced, also on a molecular level, right? So there's on every level, actually, it's inconceivable. You couldn't even conceive of how much change is happening in 1 millisecond in your body, but that's not something you ordinarily perceive, right? So that will be a slightly hidden phenomenon, something that takes contemplation to understand. In Buddhism, the teachings on emptiness are said to be slightly hidden phenomena. In other words, they're not obvious at all, but if you contemplate them enough, you can realize them. And then there are very hidden phenomena. And so very hidden phenomena are something that just simple contemplation can't help. You can't realize them through simple contemplation. It takes gaining profound levels of spiritual realization in order to see them. So the teachings on karma are that category of phenomena. You can't figure out, they say that figuring out that anger leads to suffering, that's not that hidden. But the example they give is an example they would give is what is the karmic cause of your eyes being the color they are? That's a very hidden phenomenon, right? Whereas no matter how much you kind of try to guess and contemplate, you're not going to figure that one out, right? But they say the Buddha was able to say that to somebody. Oh, it was because you, whatever, you know, your eyes are this beautiful blue because you gave a blue flower in some previous lifetime to somebody and made them happy, and that created the karma for something, you know, of giving beauty and making others happy, and so therefore it created a karmic cause. I'm just kidding, you know, that's not, it's a fictional example. But there are many examples like that of the Buddha, you know, being able to describe very precise things. That's extremely hidden. But the general teachings on karma are not as hidden, right? Like how anger leads to problems, how craving and grasping lead to suffering. So, you know, karma actually can be, parts of karma are slightly hidden and parts of karma are very hidden. This one, there. But, so in general, oftentimes the Buddha categorized, when he gave these kind of general teachings on karma, he often spoke, first of all, about the 10 non-virtuous actions. So I should mention those, right? So there are three, they go from speech, body, then speech, and then mind. Three of body, 4 of speech, and 3 of mind are in this category. They're a little similar to the, they're not the identical to, but they're somewhat similar to the 10, that Moses, 10 commandments, that's the word, forgot the word. So anyway, the 3 of body are not to kill, not to steal, and not to commit sexual misconduct. Then the 4 of speech are lying, harsh speech. And so harsh speech is, well, we'll go over this in more detail, but harsh speech is, you know, when you say something that hurts somebody, right? So that could be screaming at somebody, right? That's a form of harsh speech oftentimes. But it could also be just, you know, it could be said with a smile, right? If you say something, if you know you're going to hurt the person's feelings. So harsh speech doesn't just mean that the tone of voice is harsh. It means speech, the intention of which is to hurt somebody else's feelings, right? Make them feel bad. The third one of speech is divisive speech. You know, that's saying something to drive two people apart, right? So like, you know, if you go to somebody's spouse and tell them about the faults, right? Oh, this, you know, your spouse did this and that, and they're terrible, and you know, that'd be an example of divisive speech, right? Or if you go to somebody's friend and you talk behind their back, oh, you like them? You don't know that they do this and that? You know, like that, right? That's divisive speech. And then the 4th one of speech, you can translate it meaningless speech. Like, it could be, sometimes they call it gossip, but it could be more than gossip. It could also just be talking, like wasting, you know, when your life is precious and the other person's life is precious. It could be gossip. It could also just be wasting the other person's time talking about something that has no significance for them or yourself. Right? So it could, like gossip is, because usually when somebody says gossip, doesn't that imply like talking about somebody else? You know, sort of about, so that's included in this, but it's more general than that, because it could also, for example, if I went on, like, you know, let's say you all are coming to try and talk about karma, and if I start saying, oh, aren't these chairs interesting? Where did you get those chairs? You know, oh, who has it? You know, you go, oh, and I once had a chair, like, you know, it's like, it has no meaning to me. It's a waste of time. And so the idea behind the meaningless speech one is that people's time is precious, right? And so don't talk about something that has no meaning. You know, that's the implication. And then the 3 that are mental, 3 mental actions that the Buddha talked about. One is, they usually translate covetousness, so you're just wanting stuff other people have, right? Then the next one is ill will, right? Wanting to harm. And the 3rd one is wrong views. And the one of wrong views, it means, it doesn't mean not understand, like, just to clarify that one, what wrong views really means is that's not, you know, if we're still not enlightened and we don't know everything, that's not wrong views. What they're talking about there is strongly grasping at something that's not true, right? So like, that could be an example, for example, you meet people who say, anger is good. It's good to be angry at people and hate people. Right? Especially it's good to hate certain kinds of people. Right? That'd be a wrong view, right? Because they're strongly holding to that. Actually, the view that your action, nihilism is an example of wrong view, saying what people do has no significance. Do whatever you want, doesn't matter. If you grasp at that, that's said to, actually, according to Buddhism, that's said to be the worst of all wrong views, is nihilism. So the idea that, you know, almost like nihilism can be either the belief that nothing really exists at all, or it could be the belief that, another version of nihilism is just believing that what you do doesn't matter, right? So do anything. That's said to be actually the worst of all wrong views. So anyway, yeah, so grasping strongly at wrong views. So those are the 10 non-virtuous actions taught by the Buddha. And then what I wanted to get into a little bit, because I think it's useful to think about, and also it'll relate, because we're going to focus a lot in future classes on purification of karma. But actually, before we can get to that, it's useful to understand the ripening the results of karma. So I want to go into that today. And so it's said that you can sometimes categorize how karma ripens as either 3 or 4 kinds of results. So there is an action, because the idea is cause and result, right? Cause and effect. So you can call it results or effects of karmic actions. And so, yeah, okay, so I'm trying to think, maybe it's good to give it, to take an example. So, in order to explain this one, maybe it's good to use an example of a karmic action in order to then describe the results. So maybe I'll use the example of stealing. Right? And so I want to start with this. So stealing, right? If stealing is a negative karmic action, that means, what does that mean, right? So first of all, we're not yet at the results, but I wanted to just go over briefly what does it mean to steal, right? So stealing means, right, somebody else values something, right? Or they have something that they value, they view it as their own. And then with a negative motivation. So either out of motivation, oftentimes stealing is done by greed, right? I want it. But sometimes stealing can be done with anger, right? You're stealing it to hurt the person, right? And sometimes it can be done out of ignorance, right? Like thinking, oh, it's just good to, not really, almost like a, well, this is good, it's fun. Sometimes teenagers do it more. I've seen that where sometimes teenagers do it out of ignorance, right? They think it's just fun, there's nothing wrong with it. Sometimes there's greed there too, though. They're mixed together. So in other words, with stealing, the thing belongs to somebody else, right? You have this kind of some negative motivated state, right? And then you take it, and then you think, now it's mine. And as soon as you think it's yours, you've stolen. Does that make sense? So then, what are the results of stealing? Right? That's what we want to. Because I want to give an example. And the reason I'm just using stealing as the example is to go through the 4. I'm going to categorize them as 4, even though it's like 3A and 3B or something. One is 2 subsets. But I want to go through the different kinds of results. So let's assume that somebody stole, something of significant value to another person. So they say the first kind of karmic result of that action, they call it usually the ripened result, is sometimes how that's translated. And what the Buddha said was that this kind of result, the first kind of result of stealing, let's say, is a rebirth in one of the 3 lower realms. So that means you get reborn not as a human being, but as some other kind of creature. And again, this is a, what's the word? Can I prove that? No, I'm just reporting what the Buddha said. This is the Buddha's teaching. So the Buddha said, if you steal, right, then the ripened result is rebirth in one of the 3 lower realms. And it can be any of those lower realms, but I'll give an example, right? One of the, because it's a common one for stealing, is of the 3 lower realms, one is called hungry ghosts, right? Ghosts who wander with very unpleasant bodies, and they can barely move, and they never find what they need, and they're always hungry, always suffering, never have enough resources. Many times it's said that beings who steal take rebirth as hungry ghosts, where they kind of wander through deserts and can't eat and can't drink, and gave you a good meditation on this one time. And they finally find something, and then they can't, somebody else beats them up and takes it from them, or they have these obstructions so that they can't swallow it and so on. So imagine, right, a being steals something from somebody else, motivated by greed. Right? So the Buddha would say the common karmic result of that is they take rebirth. It leads to a rebirth in this hungry ghost realm that goes on for thousands of years. So the being wanders and wanders and wanders in that realm and suffers amazingly, right? A karma of greed, right? That's what that is. Right? It's a karmic result of a greed action based on greed and harming others. Because when you harm others, ultimately you harm yourself. Right? So that's just the first karmic result of that action. Right? Then let's assume that eventually, finally, that hungry ghost dies, and due to some previous positive karma, again gets reborn as a human being. Right? Because that'll help to describe the rest of the results. So then they're again reborn as a human being. So now there are additional results. One is a result similar. Now I'm going to get into 2 kinds of results similar to the cause, is how they translate it. So what that means is it's similar to stealing, right? So the first of those is the person's reborn in a situation where they experience experiences that are similar to what they did to others, right? So they may be born in a poor family, they may have things stolen from them often, and so on. Does that make sense? And then they think, why does this always happen to me? You know, I parked on the street, everybody parked on the street, my car got stolen. Why is that, right? You know, why is it that my house is the only one broken into? Why is it that I got the pickpocket? Why is it, you know, and so on, right? And then why is it that, you know, right across, some people are born across town, they have enough resources. My family, I was born in this situation where I don't have enough resources. So the Buddha said, well, that's part of the result, similar to the cause. In other words, and that makes sense, right? I mean, in other words, you understand what I'm getting at there. Then the next result, similar to the cause, and this is actually this is the Lama Zopa Rinpoche pointed out, correct? I mean, very astutely, and I think very deeply. In other words, I think he was making a very deep point. Is that the next one is actually the worst of all the karmic results. And it's the impulse to do the action again. In other words, that you habituate your mind to stealing, right? And this is the tragic one, so I just want to point it out, right? So imagine this, the being steals, they get reborn in the lower realm, right? They're finally a human being again, and then this is what happens, right? They're reborn in a situation where they don't have enough resources, right? And they're reborn around people, right? Part of that result is also around people who steal, right? And then it's so easy for them to want to steal again, right? I don't have enough resources, people around me steal, people steal from me. I guess that's what you do, right? And the person starts stealing again. They have a natural inclination to that because they did it in the past. And what Lama Zopa Rinpoche was pointing out there is that this is the one that can, unless you practice and make effort, this is the one that for all of us, in other words, this is not just somebody other than us, this is like for us, that makes samsaric suffering endless. Right? Because unless you make effort, you never break out of that, because you have all these conditionings to do negative things. So when you have the impulse to do a negative thing, it's because you've had that impulse. What this teaching is saying, it's because you've done that thing in the past, and so you're habituated to it. So if you don't make effort, it's going to be natural that you're going to keep doing that. And the problem is these two, just my own contemplation is this, that these two kinds of results, similar to or congruent with the cause, are related, right? In other words, like, you know, why is it, right? There's people steal from me, I don't have enough stuff, everybody around me steals, so I'm going to go steal, right? Or think of sexual misconduct, right? Well, my spouse is cheating on me, you know, my parents cheated on each other and they divorced, all my neighbors are cheating, you know, and now I see somebody, you know, flirting with me, of course I'm going to go cheat, right? You see what I mean? Like, in other words, it's so hard to break out of this one because those two are related, right? You're in an environment where other beings do the action. You're in an environment where you're not getting along with, you know, either, like the one with the stealing, right? You don't have enough resources. The one with the spouse, my spouse is always arguing with me and we never get along, then I want to cheat, right? There is that those two support each other, because you have an environment and then you have a habit, and they each support the other if you don't break out of it. Does that make sense? So those are two kinds of results. And then the fourth kind of result is an environmental result. So the environmental result, like of stealing, would be being reborn in a place where crops don't grow well, you know, where businesses tend not to go. You know, so you're born in a neighborhood or an area where businesses tend to all be failing. Right, there are you know, like you see, like why is it that you know, you look at it, even like for example recently within the U.S., you can see some cities are completely are in horrible situations. Other cities are doing much better, right? And then of course, if you compare that to other parts of the globe, the contrast is even bigger, right? You know, different. If you look at one part of the globe or another part of the globe, there are huge differences. But with stealing, it would be so crops fail, businesses fail, you know, hail or other kind of environmental problems. So you were born in a place where that kind of thing tends to happen, and there aren't enough resources. Does that make sense? Actually, I'll share also, since I brought up the sexual misconduct. The sexual misconduct one is being reborn in dirty, stinky places, because it's actually because you're attached to the kind of dirty, you know, action. It reflects something about the nature of the action in each case. So does that make sense? So I just want to make it be clear. So there are four. So an action is the action, the karmic, according to the Buddha, right? If the person does the action, it leads to all different at least those four different kinds of results. And do you see why? Like, Whereas if, it would seem from the reason why I think Lama Zobrumshe's point is so profound, when he taught that, I thought about it a lot, and I thought, that's very profound, because an ordinary person would think that the rebirth in lower realms is the worst result, right? Whereas being a hungry ghost for thousands or tens of thousands of years seems way worse than just stealing again, right? But that would be from the point of view of an ordinary person, right? But if you think more deeply, if you're actually a real spiritual person, then it's like Lama Zobrumshe is a true, if you have wisdom like that, right? Then you see, oh, the other one's much worse, because then it keeps going endlessly, right? Whereas then the person's going to take rebirth again and again and again and again that way. At least if it was only once and then it was completely finished, there would be some relief. There'd be some feeling of, it's horrible, but at least at the end, there's something good. With this one, if that continues, then there's never relief. There's never freedom. Does that make sense? So that's why that one's the worst, really. If you think deeply about it, it's the worst because, and that one actually also, again, there are some parts of karma that don't require it, that aren't so hidden, right? And that one's not so hidden, right? In other words, so now I want to, this is I think the thing I wanted to get to. Now that we've gone over the 4 kinds of results, what I want to say is if we study those, the Buddha said, actually, again, we can't understand, the deep, detailed specifics of karma are very difficult to see, like, they say, like, they give the example of why it is a peacock's, why does a peacock have all those colors in a particular place, that's extremely hidden. But on a practical level, it's not so hidden if you understand these basic teachings, to look at your own life, and there's a Buddhist saying from Tibet, I believe. It's, I'm not going to get the words exactly right, but basically the meaning is this: is if you want to understand who you were, basically, well, actually, I won't even use the phrase. If you want to understand what you did in past lives or what your continuum is of, just look at your situation. It's not so hard to figure out, right? Whereas look at your own impulses. Just look at what you have a habit of wanting to do, right? Look at the environment around you. Look at what the people around you do. Look at what kinds of experiences you have, often, right? And it's not so hard to figure out. And they say, and then sometimes, this is the part from Tibet I will say, because sometimes in Tibet people want to go to lamas and have them do a divination of some kind to tell them what their future rebirth is going to be. And a wise answer to that is, well, what are you doing now? You don't need a divination. I think Pabonka Rinpoche said that. You don't really need a divination. Just notice what you're doing. Right? How are you treating other people? And you can answer the question yourself. What your future life is going to be. You don't need an astrologer or clairvoyant to tell you. So I'll just go through. Actually, I'm just going to go through a few examples, right? So they're fairly obvious. Now, once you get the idea from stealing, right? So if you kill, right? If you murder, right, or kill others, right? It's no mystery, right? It could be any of the 3 lower realms, but oftentimes that would be that's what the hell realms reflect. And anything can lead. It's not the only cause of hell realms, and that's not the only result. But hell is when the Buddhist descriptions of hell realms are hatred, right? They're descriptions of the results of anger, of actions done out of hatred, and things like. But as a human realm, right, it'll be having a short life, being sick, being weak, not having, either dying or being sick a lot or not being able to live. Right? And then also being reborn in a place that's dangerous, right, where beings are being killed or there's a lot of danger, and then the impulse to kill again. Right? Stealing I already went over, sexual misconduct. Some of the causes would be, right, or think about it, right? Being reborn in a situation where they give different examples, but one is your relationships don't last. Right? The people, when you have relationships, people never do what you want them to do, and they always do the opposite, right? And there's a lot of conflict, right? And it could be in your family, right? And it could be in your, so it could be like your parents. It could be in your own marriage when you're older, right? But also, and then people around you, your aunts, your uncles, right? Things like that. And then people do a lot of sexual misconduct. And then you have the impulse to do that kind of thing. Lying, right? I'll just go through briefly. I'm going to just go through the human part, right? If you've lied a lot in past lives, people don't believe you, right? Your words don't seem to have much power, and people lie to you a lot. The impulse to lie, and you live in an environment where people cheat, and think about like how what service is like if you live in an environment where you see a lot of corruption, that would be a reflection. divisive speech, right? I mentioned that one earlier. So, aside from the rebirth in the lower realms, it would be being lonely, not having many friends, having a hard time finding employees or people to work with, or coworkers, having difficulty having harmonious relationships, and losing people all the time, right? Like you connect with somebody and then they have to move away, or they don't like you suddenly, or they won't want to stay your friend. And then of course having the tendency to continue creating disunity. And the environmental result is living in inhospitable environments or places where communication is difficult, where it's hard to communicate with others. Or also where it's hard to get to other places, right? Where it's hard to connect with others. Insulting words, right? Or harsh speech, right? So of course that's no mystery, right? Being reborn in a place where you're abused, where people speak harshly to each other, speak harshly to you, where even if you try to speak positively, people interpret it as if you're being mean. This is a common experience, right? You have a tendency to be critical of others, right? Having some kind of habit. Why am I always feeling critical of others? And the environmental result, they say, is living in a place where where the environment itself is harsh, actually. So there are brambles, and the ground is hard to walk on, and it's rocky, and it's things like that. Idle gossip, they say karmic result of that is people don't listen to you, don't take you seriously, feel what you say is silly, people dismiss you. I like this one, actually, this is the way somebody translated it. The result some of the cause, having a tendency to talk continuously and fill any quiet moment with the sound of your own voice. That's, actually, I'll just go through these quickly. Yeah, that's good. So, covetousness, right? After rebirth in lower realms, the results, you will never be able to, you are unable to achieve your aims and get what you want. So, like, in other words, you always want something and can't get it. Because that's actually the pattern of covetousness, right? In other words, covetousness is you want what you can't have in this life, and so then you were born where you're always wanting what you can't have. And you're always dissatisfied, always grasping, and always being attached to things and not being able to get them. And you live in a place that's like that, right? Where again, there are, where there's not quite enough. Let's put it that way. I think this one's interesting. Harmful intent, right? Or ill will, something like that. Actually, a karmic result of that, I just thought this one was interesting, is you're a person who's easily frightened and panicky, fearful, or paranoid. Right? In other words, that aggression towards others leads to fear that others will be aggressive to you. Does that make sense? And again, having a tendency to hurt others and be angry and hateful. And then the last one, ignorant, wrong views, right? So one would be, actually it doesn't mention it here, but one would be being reborn in a place where nobody even talks about the right view, right? Not about right views. That's actually where you can't even find any right views, right? There are a lot of places like that, right? Where everything everybody says is just, what's the way to say it, like destructive. In other words, you only hear destructive advice and destructive input, which is tragic, actually, right? If you think about those kinds of situations, it's terrible. And then also another result of that is being ignorant of correct views and having a hard time realizing. So in other words, this is often like if you go to, you see this if you go to like a retreat or something, where you're watching I've been many times where you see like I'll give an example, like maybe if Lama Zopa's teaching, I've been to those kind of retreats, and you see where some people have such an easy time, like wow, and they're having some kind of insights, and then somebody else is getting angry and upset, by the same teaching, because they don't have a disposition to that. And so even hearing something like the value of love and compassion, they start to feel agitated and upset. It's like it doesn't fit with their, worldview or something like that, right? It's because of that. So the reason I wanted to go over those now, one is it's part of the class, but another is I wanted to for 15, 20 minutes do an exercise together. We always do this, right? Break up into small groups. So what I want to do is this time try to break them into fairly small ones, not like 10 or 12 people, but like three, let's say. Let's aim for 3. But here's what I want to ask you to do, is to honestly try to think of yourself, right, in this way. Right, and to honestly assess, now, you don't have to share more than you're willing to with your crew, it's up to you how much you want to share, but to share something of what's, who were you in a past life? Now I'm not asking for, the answer here is not, I was Cleopatra or something. I was Abraham Lincoln, no.
Everybody's Joan of Arc.
But what were your, it's like, it's that teaching that the Buddha said, right? In other words, it's given the people I've been around in my life, given my habits, given my experiences, what do they suggest I did in the past, right? That's just the question. And because that's a prerequisite to purifying your karma. In other words, karma, the good thing about karma is that it can be purified. But you can't purify your karma if you don't have some understanding of yourself, right? That's the idea here. And you can't break a pattern if you don't know what your patterns are, right? Or so you can't, there's like, and if you don't have a deep understanding of, wow, I have this impulse to do this thing, but it's caused these kind of problems for me. In other words, that's how you start to want to change a pattern and actually become capable of changing it. So there's a benefit to contemplating this way. So I want to ask people, let's break them into groups of 3, and just like try to share, take turns and just share based on your, again, it's based on your, actually you can base it on this, on your experiences, your family, your body, and your mind, right? What does that imply about something from your past? Does that make sense? And I include body because, for example, I sometimes get back pain. Well, that's an example, right? To contemplate, well, there'll be a Buddhist teaching, actually. If I'm having back pain, well, what would be a logical, but that, I don't think that came from massaging ointment on other people in past lives. It came from something worse. But so let's do 15, 20 minutes like that, and then we'll come back together.
Yeah, they're really awesome.
So did anybody figure out who you were in a past life?
Naughty.
Not who you were, but what you did. Actually, any comments or questions about this part of the Buddhist teachings on karma, let's call it? Or is it all okay for now?
Crystal clear.
Thank you.
So I'll ask you guys, why does a peacock have all this color? Say only a Buddha can answer questions like that.
One of the, again, we were talking back here, and one of the things that I had was, constant self-doubt and self-fear, and how that fits in, and where that, in past lives, and, looking at these teachings, and, unfortunately, it wasn't a clear box to put it in.
Yeah, we could put it in almost all of them.
Right,
It's like,
and parts of it from here, parts of it from here, parts of it here.
Say again, self-doubt and what?
Self-fear.
Self-fear.
it's like fear you're not doing something right, fear you're never good enough.
Yep.
Well, what we realized is that everything under this umbrella is the incorrect perception of self as the center.
Yeah, we got into that.
Yeah.
That's clearly the root of all negative actions, actually, isn't it? And that's what, right, all the other ones stop. That's like cutting off the root, right, then all the other things stop. I'll make actually one quick comment, just because what you were getting at, I think a lot of people have that kind of question, and so I'll just make a couple quick comments, and then we'll, because actually I was relating, when you said that, I related to the idea of self-esteem, right, self-confidence or self-esteem. And that was something that at one time in the past I had a series of conversations with Lama Zopa Rinpoche about. So there are a few, actually, I'll just say a few things that Lama Zopa Rinpoche shared about that, just for people's, because I was curious about it myself, so that's why I asked them. And so a few things. One was, there were a few karmic, because I asked him particularly about karma related to that. That was one whole topic we talked about. And so one thing was, there were a few examples he said, where he said that, a way of developing positive confidence and self-esteem is praising the good actions of others, like actually verbally praising the good actions of others. He said like ordinary people and then also Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, like praising their good actions. That was one cause. And so the the opposite of that, right, would be criticized. Like, so, whereas if that's he didn't say this, but a logical implication of that would be, so if a cause of confidence and self-esteem is praising the good actions of ordinary people, Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, then being critical of others would be a cause of, one of the causes of low self-esteem. And then another discussion I had with Rinpoche was, he pointed out, actually it's from the Lamrim teachings, there's a certain teaching on how to, not just how to get a perfect human rebirth, but how to get a special perfect human rebirth. We have these unique qualities. And so one of those qualities is confidence. You know, because in other words, it helps you to practice Dharma more effectively if you're confident, right? And so, in that context, Lama Zopa Rinpoche pointed out that the cause of that kind of confidence, of strong confidence like that, he said, is if you want to have that in a future life, then in this life, he said a way of creating the cause is, he said, to find tasks that other people don't want to do, or are afraid to do, or are overwhelmed by, and then voluntarily jumping in to help. And he gave, so he gave examples of that. He said, so like, there are all different kinds of tasks that, it could be something huge, or it could be something small, right? Like, there are lots of small examples of things people don't want to do, like cleaning the toilet, or, like that doesn't have to be something huge, but it can also be something really big, right? Like, it could be something big in the sense of, helping somebody, that's really difficult, right? Somebody who's really sick, or we're going through a very hard time, or it could be taking on some project, like, there are lots of projects in the world that are really hard, right? All over the planet, right? Of every kind that are wonderful things, right? Whether it's, they're like, whether it's things related to a Buddhist center, or whether it's things like environmental problems, like, but so stepping in and doing and saying, I'll do my part, because it's needed, right? And because others need to do it, and others are afraid to, or find it overwhelming, or just don't want to. But that's a cause, that's a karmic cause, and that's sort of logical. Even in this life, you would develop more confidence. But also, Rinpoche pointed out that in future lives, then that's a karmic pattern that develops greater confidence. He said other things too, but those are the ones that are popping in my head right now. So anyway, so the implication of that would be like that. Sorry to say it. That passing off tasks on others would probably be the opposite, right? There is like so if you say, and we all have the capacity to do that, right? To say, I'm really busy suddenly, when the hard task comes along, so that would be a cause of not having self-esteem and good confidence. Is when the implication of what Lama Zopa said, right, would be that, right? So there is when the difficult task comes and it's coming, and then you take your lunch break right then when they're about to ask, right? Or like, or the call is coming, and so you turn off your phone for that, and you say, I wasn't getting good reception. I don't know. Right, like. Those are examples. Those are a couple examples from what Lama Zopa said. If I think of others, I'll share them next time. Maybe I'll look through my notes. He had other examples, but those are the ones I remember right now off the top of my head. But I thought that was interesting because I was asking how can people create the karma for more self-esteem. So he was giving those as examples, but the opposite would be, the implication would be, if you did the opposite of those, then you would create the cause of less self-confidence. But anyway, I'm sure there's more to that.
I had one thing I wonder if you had an insight on, not feeling part of a group and going from group to group, but never feeling part of one. Any insight on that?
I'm not sure. I mean, let's think together. I'm not sure, but is that similar? Let's see. Because that would be a relational one, right? For sure, that's a relational karma, right? So you'd have to ask: is it more? Is it the relation? The particular? It's not related to killing or stealing, right? It's not. So the question would be: is that more something like divisive speech, or is it more something like sexual misconduct? Is it Whereas I'm not sure, but it'll be something in those, right? The ones that are about relationships, right? Because think about I'll give two examples. Divisive speech. One of the things is having difficulty developing and sustaining good relationships, feeling lonely, not having enough friends or support, not having enough. So it could be divisive speech. But then another one, the sexual misconduct one, being unable to keep relationships, having them fall apart, quickly separating from spouse, family, or friends, students or employees, people not doing what you wish. So it would be, I would think of those two as, because again, it's not really insulting words. It's not conflict or harshness. It's not. I don't think it's about. I would think those are the two that are probably closest, at least. I'm not sure. You'd have to contemplate your own experience to see how it feels. But it would seem like it's related to because it's a relational issue, right, about sustaining relationships. And those two, because if you think about it, sexual misconduct and divisive speech are both about breaking apart. They're both different ways of breaking apart relationships, or causing relationships to not go well and not last. So I'm not sure, but I think those are, if it were me, those are the ones I would contemplate about, and see, well, would that apply, and do I have, are there other, is there other things about either of those that relate in some way or not? I don't, is worth contemplating probably, because yeah, I don't think the other ones, if you think about all the other actions, right, those two seem like the closest to that. I'm not sure. Any other comments? So I just want to say, like, so for those, for those who are doing the Discovering Buddhism, everybody's welcome just to attend, but some people are actually, sort of doing the meditations between the sessions. So if you're doing that, then the meditation to do, because it's only 1 week, right? We meet next week because we had to reschedule. So we are meeting next week because we're not meeting on the 13th because we couldn't because of the church. So we are meeting next week. So so the meditation to do for this week would be rejoicing. Right? So to rejoice, so to try, since it's only a week, to try, actually, one thing, you can do rejoicing sitting like this, right, in meditation. But one nice thing about rejoicing is you can do it anywhere. Right, you can do it while you're driving, you can do it on the metro, you can do it while you're walking, you can do it while you're laying on the couch, that's what that one lama said, right, you can do it with your feet up. So my request would be, if you're doing the Discovering Buddhism program in that way, then to do rejoicing every day. To do since you can do it anywhere, it's easy, it's like, that's when there's no excuse because you can do it, you don't have to do anything, except it's your mind, right? So to practice some rejoicing every day this week if you're doing the program fully. And next week we'll go into more details about karma. But let's before we okay, we went over. So let's just the last thing. So to create, we said this last time, right? So for karma, the main determining factor is the motivation. So we set our motivation at the beginning, and then we tried to do something positive by contemplating, discussing, meditating, and so on. So then the last thing is to dedicate, right? To dedicate the positive energy, the merit. And so, actually in Buddhism, one thing I'll say is that you can, what they say is that if you do a limited dedication, right, like just for, to have some little bit of happiness, that if you create a positive action and you dedicate for something limited, you'll get something limited. But actually, if you look at the Buddhist teachings, all the recommended dedications are for infinite things, actually. Because if you dedicate, what they say, they give an analogy there. They say if you have a cup of water and you pour it on the ground, it'll dry up. But if you take a cup of water and you pour it into the ocean, then it's part of the ocean. It's a metaphor, right? So the idea is to dedicate the merit to something limitless, because then it won't end. So the idea there would be, I'll give some examples. One is, through these virtuous actions, may we all realize bodhicitta, the wish to become a fully enlightened Buddha for the benefit of all infinite sentient beings. So to attain an infinite state of Buddhahood, infinitely wise, infinitely compassionate, in order to benefit an infinite number of sentient beings. So through these merits, may we all attain full enlightenment in order to benefit all sentient beings. Then may all beings realize bodhicitta. So where that kind of infinite wish has not arisen, may it arise and grow. Where it has arisen, may it never diminish, or always increase more and more. And then another kind of dedication that's infinite. If we find it hard to generate an infinite state of mind ourselves, then we can say, whatever limitless wishes the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas have, whatever limitless wishes like the Buddha himself and Manjushri and Samantabhadra, or infinite wishes that the Zopa Rinpoche and the Dalai Lama and Khyentse Rinpoche have, may all those come true for myself and others by virtue of the merits we've created. Then there's a dedication sealed with emptiness for those who have studied emptiness. So that one's something like, you can think, through these merits, which are dependently arisen, merely labeled, totally empty from their own side, may the I, which is merely labeled, dependently arisen, totally empty from its achieve Buddha's full enlightenment, which is merely labeled, dependently arisen, totally empty from its own side. In order to lead all sentient beings who are dependently arisen, merely labeled, totally empty from their own side, to the state of enlightenment as quickly as possible. And then we can do like more, less infinite ones, right? Like, so you can dedicate, like, you know, may there be peace on this planet. May beings be loving, kind, and patient with each other. May all of us here, gain wisdom, loving kindness, and compassion. Be kind to ourselves and kind to others, and be skillful in creating the causes of happiness and creating the causes of